Of the art of discussion. It is a practice of our justice to condemn some as a warning to others. To condemn them because they have done wrong would be stupidity, as Plato says, for what is done cannot be undone. But they are condemned so that they may not do the same wrong again, or so that others may avoid the example of their wrongdoing. We do not correct the man we hang. We correct others through him. I do the same. My errors are by now natural and incorrigible, but the good that worthy men do the public by making themselves imitable, I shall perhaps do by making myself evitable. See Bossus' squalor, see how Albius' son lives poorly. Lessons these to everyone, not to squander his estate. Horse. By my publishing and accusing my imperfections, someone will learn to fear them. The parts that I most esteem in myself derive more honor from self-accusation than from self-commendation. That is why I fall back into the former and dwell on it more often. But when all is said and done, you never speak about yourself without loss. Your self-condemnation is always accredited, your self-praise discredited. There may be some people of my temperament, I who learn better by contrast than by example, and by flight than by pursuit. This was the sort of teaching that Cato the Elder had in view when he said that the wise have more to learn from the fools than the fools from the wise, and also the ancient lyre player who, Pausanias tells us, was accustomed to force his pupils to go hear a bad musician who lived across the way, where they might learn to hate his discords and false measures. The horror I feel for cruelty throws me back more deeply into clemency than any model of clemency could attract me to it. A good horseman does not correct my seat as does an attorney or a Venetian on horseback, and a bad way of speaking reforms mine better than a good one. Every day the stupid bearing of another warns and admonishes me. What stings, touches, and arouses us better than what pleases. These times are fit for improving us only backward, by disagreement more than by agreement, by difference more than by similarity. Being little taught by good examples, I make use of the bad ones, whose lessons are common. I have tried to make myself as agreeable as I saw others unpleasant, as firm as I saw others lax, as mild as I saw others violent, but I was setting myself unattainable standards. The most fruitful and natural exercise of our mind, in my opinion, is discussion. I find it sweeter than any other action of our life, and that is the reason why, if I were right now forced to choose, I believe I would rather consent to lose my sight than my hearing or speech. The Athenians, and the Romans too, preserved this practice in great honor in their academies. In our time, the Italians retain some vestiges of it, to their great advantage, as is seen by a comparison of our intelligence with theirs. The study of books is a languishing and feeble activity that gives no heat, whereas discussion teaches and exercises us at the same time. If I discuss with a strong mind and a stiff jouster, he presses on my flanks, prods me right and left. His ideas launch mine. Rivalry, glory, competition push me and lift me above myself. And unison is an altogether boring quality in discussion. As our mind is strengthened by communication with vigorous and orderly minds, so it is impossible to say how much it loses and degenerates by our continual association and frequentation with mean and sickly minds. There is no contagion that spreads like that one. I know by enough experience how much it is worth per yard. I love to argue and discuss, but in a small group and for my own sake. For to serve as a spectacle to the great and make a competitive parade of one's wit and chatter is an occupation that I find very unbecoming to a man of honor. Stupidity is a bad quality, but to be unable to endure it, to be irritated and chafed by it, as happens to me, is another sort of malady which is scarcely less troublesome than stupidity, and that is what I now wish to accuse in myself. I enter into discussion and argument with great freedom and ease, inasmuch as opinion finds in me a bad soil to penetrate and take deep roots in. No propositions astonish me, no belief offends me, whatever contrast it offers with my own. There is no fancy so frivolous and so extravagant that it does not seem to me quite suitable to the reduction of the human mind. We who deprive our judgment of the right to make decisions look mildly on opinions different from ours, and if we do not lend them our judgment, we easily lend them our ears. Where one scale of the balance is totally empty, I let the other vacillate under an old woman's dreams, and it seems to me excusable if I take rather the odd number than the even, Thursday rather than Friday, if I am happier to be 12th or 14th than 13th at table. If I would rather see a hare skirting my path when I travel than crossing it, and rather give my left foot than my right to be booted first. All such idle fancies, which are in credit around us, deserve at least to be listened to. For me, they outweigh only emptiness, but they do outweigh that. Popular and chance opinions count and weight for something, and not nothing, in nature. And he who does not let himself go that far may perhaps fall into the vice of obstinacy to avoid that of superstition. So contradictions of opinions neither offend nor affect me. They merely arouse and exercise me. We flee from correction, we should face it and go to meet it, especially when it comes in the form of discussion, not ex cathedra. At every opposition, we do not consider whether it is just, but right or wrong, how we can get rid of it. Instead of stretching out our arms to it, we stretch out our claws. I could stand to be rudely jarred by my friends. You're a fool. You're dreaming. I like to see people speak up bravely among gallant men, and to see the words go where the thought goes. We should strengthen and toughen our ears against this tenderness toward the ceremonious sound of words. I like a strong, manly fellowship and familiarity, a friendship that delights in the sharpness and vigor of its intercourse, as does love in bites and scratches that draw blood. It is not vigorous and generous enough if it is not quarrelsome, if it is civilized and artful, if it fears knocks and moves with constraint. For there can be no discussion without contradiction. Cicero. When someone opposes me, he rouses my attention, not my anger. I go to meet a man who contradicts me, who instructs me. The cause of truth should be the common cause for both. What will he answer? The passion of wrath has already smitten his judgment. Confusion has seized it before reason. It would be useful if we decided our disputes by a wager if there was a material mark of our losses, so that we might keep an account of them, and my valet could say to me, "It cost you 100 crowns 20 times last year to be ignorant and stubborn." I give a warm welcome to truth, in whatever hand I find it, and cheerfully surrender to it, and extend my conquered arms, from as far off as I see it approach. And provided they do not go about it with too imperious and magisterial a frown, I lend a hand to the criticism people make of my writings, and have often changed them more out of civility than to improve them, loving to gratify and foster my critics' freedom to admonish me by the ease with which I yield, yes, even at my own expense. It is certainly hard to induce the men of my time to do this. They have not the courage to correct, because they have not the courage to suffer being corrected, and they always speak with dissimulation in one another's presence. I take such great pleasure in being judged and known that it is virtually indifferent to me in which of the two forms I am so. My thinking so often contradicts and condemns itself that it is all one to me if another does the job, especially seeing that I give to his criticism only as much authority as I wish. But I break off with a man who bears himself as high-handedly as one man I know, who regrets having given advice if it is not accepted, and is affronted if you balk at following it. That Socrates always smilingly welcomed the contradictions offered to his arguments might be said to be due to his strength, and to the fact that, since the advantage was certain to fall on his side, he accepted them as a matter for new glory. But we see, on the contrary, that there is nothing which makes us so sensitive to contradictions as the idea of our superiority and the disdain for our adversary, and that, in reason, it is rather for the weaker to accept with good grace and criticisms that correct him and set him right. In truth, I seek more the company of people who treat me roughly than that of those who fear me. It is an insipid and harmful pleasure to have to do with people who admire us and give way to us. Antisthenes ordered his children never to thank or be grateful to a man who praised them. I feel much prouder of the victory I win over myself when, in the very heat of battle, I make myself bow beneath the force of my adversary's reason, than I feel gratified by the victory I win over him through his weakness. In fine, I receive and acknowledge any sort of blows that are straightforward, however weak they may be, but I am only too intolerant of those that are out of order. I care little about the subject matter. Opinions are all one to me, and I am almost indifferent about which opinion wins. I will argue peaceably a whole day if the debate is conducted with order. It is not so much strength and subtlety that I ask for as order. The order that we see every day in the altercations of shepherds and shop boys never MLS. If they get off track, it is by way of incivility. So indeed do we. But their turbulence and impatience never sidetrack them from their theme. Their argument follows its course. If they get ahead of one another, if they do not wait for one another, at least they understand one another. For me, any answer is only too good if it is to the point. But when the argument is confused and disorderly, I give up the substance and attach myself angrily and indiscriminately to the form, and throw myself into a headstrong, malicious, and imperious way of arguing, which I have to blush for afterward. It is impossible to discuss things in good faith with a fool. Not only is my judgment corrupted in the hands of so impetuous a master, but my conscience is also. Our disputes ought to be forbidden and punished like other verbal crimes. What vice do they not stir and heap up? Being always governed and commanded by anger. We feel hostility first against the reasons, and then against the men. We learn to argue only in order to contradict, and with each man contradicting and being contradicted, it turns out that the fruit of the argument is to ruin and annihilate the truth. Thus Plato, in his Republic, prohibits this exercise to inept and ill-born minds. What is the use of your setting out in quest of that which is, with a man whose pace and gait are no good? We do no wrong to the subject when we leave it in order to see about the way to treat it. I do not mean a scholastic and artificial way. I mean a natural way, that of a sound understanding. What will come of it in the end? One goes east, the other west. They lose the main point and mislay it in the throng of incidentals. After an hour of stormy argument, they do not know what they are looking for. One is low, another high, another wide of the mark. One man catches at a word or a smile. One is no longer aware of his opponent's points, so involved is he in the course of his argument. And he is thinking about falling himself, not you. One man, finding his back too weak, fears everything, denies everything, mixes up and confuses the point from the outset, or at the height of the debate, rebels and is flatly silent. Through our spiteful ignorance, affecting a haughty contempt, or a stupidly modest avoidance of contention. One man, provided he can strike, does not care how much he lays himself open. Another counts his words and weighs them as reasons. This one uses only the advantage of his voice and lungs. Here is one who concludes against himself, and this one who deafens you with useless preambles and digressions. This other arms himself with sheer insults and seeks a German quarrel to get rid of the company and conversation of a mind that presses his own hard. This last fellow sees nothing in reason, but holds you besieged within the dialectical enclosure of his clauses and with the formulas of his art. Now you will begin to distrust learning and to doubt whether any solid fruit can be derived from it for the needs of life, considering the use we make of it. Studies that cure nothing, Seneca. Who has acquired understanding from logic? Where are her fine promises? Neither for living better nor for reasoning more fitly, Cicero. Do we witness more of a jumble in the chatter of fishwives than in the public disputations of the professional logicians? I would rather have my son learn to speak in the taverns than in the schools of talk. Take a master of arts, converse with him. Why does he not make us feel this artificial excellence and captivate the women and the ignoramuses like ourselves with admiration for the strength of his reasons and the beauty of his order? Why does he not dominate and persuade us at will? Why does a man with such advantages in matter and method mix insults, recklessness, and fury with his fencing? Let him strip off his hood, his gown, and his Latin. Let him not beat our ears with pure and undigested Aristotle, and you will take him for one of us, or worse. It seems to me that with this complication and interlacing of language with which they beset us, it turns out as, with sleight of hand performers, their dexterity attacks and overpowers our senses, but it does not shake our belief at all. Aside from this legerdemain, they do nothing that is not commonplace and mean. For being more learned, they are nonetheless inept. I love and honor learning as much as those who have it, and in its true use it is man's most noble and powerful acquisition. But in those, and their number is infinite, who base their fundamental capacity and worth on it, who appeal from their understanding to their memory, hiding under the shadow of others, Seneca, and can do nothing except by the book. I hate it, if I dare say so, a little more than stupidity. In my country, and in my time, learning often enough men's purses, rarely minds. If it encounters dull minds, it weighs them down and suffocates them, like a crude and undigested mass. If sharp ones, it is apt to purify, clarify, and subtleize them to the point of inanition. It is a thing of almost indifferent quality, a very useful accessory to a well-born mind, pernicious and harmful to another. Or rather, it is a thing of very precious use, which will not let itself be possessed at a low price. In one hand, it is a scepter, in another, a fool's bauble. But let us get on. What greater victory do you expect, then, to teach your enemy that he is no match for you? When you win the advantage of your proposition, it is truth that wins. When you win the advantage for order and method, it is you who win. It is my opinion that in Plato and Xenophon, Socrates argues more for the sake of the arguers than for the sake of the argument, and to instruct Euthydemus and Protagoras rather in their own impertinence than in the impertinence of their art. He takes hold of the first subject that comes along, like a man who has a more useful aim than to illuminate it, to wit, to illuminate the minds that he undertakes to manage and exercise. Agitation and the chase are properly our quarry. We are not excusable if we conduct it badly and irrelevantly. To fail in the catch is another thing, for we are born to quest after truth. To possess it belongs to a greater power. It is not, as Democritus said, hidden in the bottom of abysses, but rather elevated to an infinite height in the divine knowledge. The world is but a school of inquiry. The question is not who will hit the ring, but who will make the best runs at it. He who speaks true can speak as foolishly as he who speaks false, for we are concerned with the manner, not the matter, of speaking. My humor is to consider the form as much as the substance, the advocate as much as the cause, as Alcibiades ordered we should do. And every day I amuse myself reading authors without any care for their learning, looking for their style, not their subject, just as I seek the company of some famous mind, not to have him teach me, but to come to know him. Any man may speak truly, but to speak with order, wisely, and competently, of that few men are capable. Thus it is not the falsity that comes from ignorance that offends me, but the ineptitude. I have broken off many dealings that would have been useful to me because of the irrelevant bickering of those with whom I was dealing. I do not get excited once in a year over the mistakes of those over whom I have authority, but over the stupidity and obstinacy of their brutish and asinine assertions, excuses, and defenses. We are at each other's throats every day. They understand neither what is said nor why, and answer accordingly. It is enough to drive a man to despair. I never feel my head roughly jarred except by another head, and I put up with the vices of my servants sooner than with their heedlessness, importunity, and stupidity. Let them do less, provided they are capable of doing something. You live in hope of kindling their will, but from a stump there is nothing worthwhile to be hoped for or enjoyed. But supposing I take things otherwise than they are, perhaps I do, and this is why I blame my impatience, and hold, in the first place, that it is equally a fault in one who is right and in one who is wrong, for it is always a tyrannical ill humor to be unable to endure a way of thinking different from your own, and then in truth there is no greater more constant, or more uncouth absurdity than to become worked up and stung by the absurdities of the world. For it irritates us chiefly with ourselves, and that philosopher of times past would never have lacked occasion for his tears as long as he considered himself. Michel, one of the 7 sages of a Timonian and democratic humor, when he was asked what he was laughing at to himself, answered, "At the fact that I am laughing to myself. How many stupid things I say and reply every day in my own judgment, and so assuredly how many more in the judgment of others. If I bite my lips over them, what must the others do? In short, we must live among the living, and let the river flow under the bridge, without caring, or, at the very least, without being upset by it. After all, why can we encounter someone with a crooked and malformed body without being moved, when we cannot bear encountering an ill-ordered mind without getting angry? This vicious violence has more to do with the judge than with the fault. Let us always have this saying of Plato in our mouths: if I find a thing unsound, is it not because I myself am unsound? Am I not myself at fault? May not my admonition be turned around against me? A wise and divine refrain, which scourges the most universal and common error of mankind. Not only the reproaches that we make to one another, but also our reasons and arguments in controversial matters can ordinarily be turned against ourselves, and we run ourselves through with our own weapons, whereof antiquity has left me weighty examples enough. This was ingeniously well said, and much to the point, by the man who thought it up. Every man likes the smell of his own dung. Adapted from Erasmus. Our eyes see nothing behind us. 100 times a day we make fun of ourselves in the person of our neighbor, and detest in others the defects that are more clearly in ourselves, and wonder at them with prodigious impudence and heedlessness. Only yesterday I had occasion to see a man of understanding and good birth making fun, as comically as justly, of the silly habit of another man, who splits everybody's head with his genealogies and family connections, more than half of them false. Those people are most prone to pounce on such silly subjects, whose quality is most doubtful and least sure, and he himself, if he turned back upon himself, would have found himself scarcely less intemperate and boring in spreading abroad and extolling the distinctions of his wife's family. O importune presumption, whereby the wife sees herself armed by the hands of her very husband! If they understood Latin, we ought to say to them, "Come now, if of herself she is not mad enough, encourage her." Terence. I do not mean that no man should criticize another unless he is clean himself, for then no one would criticize, nor indeed that he must be clean of the same sort of fault. But I mean that our judgment, laying upon another the blame which is then in question, should not spare us from judging ourselves. It is a charitable service in one who cannot remove a vice from within himself to try to remove it nevertheless from within another, where it may have a less malignant and stubborn root. Nor does it seem to me an appropriate reply to someone who warns me of my fault to say that it is also in him. What of it? The warning is still true and useful. If we had a good nose, our excrement ought to stink worse to us, inasmuch as it is our own. And Socrates is of the opinion that a man who found himself and his son and a stranger guilty of some violence and wrongdoing should begin by presenting himself to be sentenced according to the law, and by imploring the help of the executioner's hand to purge himself, and do so second for his son and last for the stranger. If this precept takes a little too high a tone, at least he should present himself first for punishment by his own conscience. The senses act as the proper and primary judges for us, and they perceive things only by their external accidents. Thus it is no wonder that in all the functions that serve the welfare of society, there is always such a universal admixture of ceremony and outward show, that the best and most effective part of government consists in these externals. It is still man we are dealing with, and it is a wonder how physical his nature is. As for those who in recent years try to construct for us a system of religious practice that is all contemplative and spiritual, they should not be astounded if there are some who think that religion would have melted away and slipped through their fingers if it did not hold fast among us as a mark, title, and instrument of division and faction rather than by itself. As in conversation, the gravity, the gown, and the fortune of the speaker often give authority to vain and inept remarks. No one would presume that a personage so redoubtable and with such a following does not have within him some more than vulgar capacity, and that a man to whom so many commissions and offices are given, a man so disdainful and so supercilious, is not abler than this other man who bows to him at such a distance, and whom no one employs. Not only the words, but also the grimaces of these people are considered and taken into account, everyone applying himself to put some fine and solid interpretation on them. If they stoop to common discussion, and you offer them anything but approbation and reverence, they beat you down with the authority of their experience. They have heard, they have seen, they have done. You are overwhelmed with examples. I would fain tell them that the fruit of a surgeon's experience is not the history of his practice and his remembering that he has cured 4 people of the plague and 3 of the gout, unless he can derive from that experience the means of forming his judgment, and can make us aware that he has become wiser in the practice of his art. So in a concert of instruments, we do not hear a lute, a spinet, and the flute. We hear a rounded harmony, the effect of the various elements joined into a whole. If travels and offices have improved them, this ought to show in their increased understanding. It is not enough to count experiences. We must weigh and sort them, and we must have digested and distilled them, to extract from them the reasons and conclusions they contain. There never were so many historians. It is always good and useful to listen to them, for they furnish us with an abundance of fair and laudable instructions from the storehouse of their memory, a great help, surely, in the service of our life. But we are not looking for that at the moment. We are looking to see whether these narrators and collectors are themselves laudable. I hate every sort of tyranny, both in words and in acts. I am inclined to resist with all my mind these vain externals that delude our judgment through the senses. In keeping a close watch on men of extraordinary eminence, I have found that they are, for the most part, men like the rest. For solid common sense is rare in that estate, juvenile. Perhaps we esteem them and see them as less than they really are, because they undertake more and show themselves more. They do not correspond to the burden they have taken on. There must be more vigor and power in the bearer than in the load. A man who has not exerted his full strength leaves you to guess whether he has any strength left over, whether he has been tested to the breaking point. A man who succumbs under his load reveals his measure and the weakness of his shoulders. That is why we see so many inept souls among the learned, and more than of the other kind. They would have made good husbandmen, good tradesmen, good artisans. Their natural vigor was cut to that proportion. Learning is a thing of great weight. They collapse under it. Their mind has neither enough vigor nor enough skill to spread out and distribute that noble and powerful matter, to make use of it and derive help from it. It can do nothing except in a strong nature, and these are very rare. And the weak ones, says Socrates, corrupt the dignity of philosophy in handling it. It appears both useless and harmful when it is badly encased. This is how they spoil themselves and make fools of themselves. Just like an ape, man's mimic, whom in jest a prankish boy in silken clothes has dressed, and left his buttocks and his backside bare, to give the guests a laugh. Claudian. Likewise for those who rule and command us, who hold the world in their hands, it is not enough to have an ordinary understanding to be able to do what we are able to do. They are far below us if they are not far above us. As they promise more, so they owe more, and therefore silence is for them a bearing not only decorous and grave, but often also profitable and economical. For Megabyzus, having gone to see Apelles in his studio, remained a long time without saying a word, and then began to discuss the painter's works, for which he received this rough reprimand. As long as you kept silence, you seemed to be quite something because of your chains and your pomp, but now that we have heard you speak, there is no one, even to the boys in my shop, who does not despise you. Those magnificent trappings, that grand state, did not permit him to be ignorant with a common ignorance, and to speak without pertinence about painting. He should have maintained in silence that external and presumptive competence. To how many stupid souls in my time has a cold and taciturn mien served as a title to wisdom and capacity? Dignities and offices are necessarily given more by fortune than by merit, and people are often wrong to blame kings for this. On the contrary, it is a marvel that they have such good luck, having so little information. To know his people is a prince's greatest virtue. Martial. For nature has not given them a vision that can scrutinize a whole populace in order to discern preeminence, and to penetrate our bosoms, where dwells the knowledge of our wills and of our best worth. They must sift us by conjecture and gropingly, by family, wealth, learning, the voice of the people, very feeble evidence. If anyone could find a way in which men could be judged by justice and chosen by reason, with that single stroke he would establish a perfect form of government. Yes, but he successfully carried out that great affair. That is saying something, but it is not saying enough, for this maxim is justly accepted, that we must not judge plans by results. The Carthaginians punished the bad plans of their commanders, even when they were corrected by a fortunate outcome. And the Roman people often refused to triumph for great and very profitable victories, because the conduct of the leader did not correspond to his good luck. We commonly perceive in the actions of this world that fortune, to teach us how much power she has in all things, and because she takes pleasure in beating down our presumption, having been unable to make the incompetent wise, makes them lucky, as if to vie with virtue, and she likes to take a hand in favoring those operations in which the web is most purely her own. Whence it is observed every day that the simplest among us brings to a successful conclusion very big tasks, both public and private. And as Ceramnes, the Persian, replied to those who were astounded how his affairs turned out so badly, seeing that his plans were so wise, that he was sole master of his plans, but of the outcome of his affairs, fortune was mistress. So these people can answer in the same way, but with an opposite twist. Most of the things of this world are done by themselves. The fates find out a way. Virgil. The outcome often justifies very inept management. Our intervention is little more than a routine, and more commonly a calculation of usage and example than of reason. Astonished at the greatness of an affair, I once learned from those who had carried it through their motives and their procedure. I found nothing but commonplace ideas, and the most commonplace and most used are also perhaps the surest and the most desirable for practice, if not for show. What if the flattest reasons are the best founded, if the lowest, loosest, and most threadbare are the best adapted to affairs? To preserve the authority of the king's council, There is no need to have the profane take part in it or see into it from closer than the first barrier. It must be revered on trust, and as a whole, if we want to foster its reputation. In my deliberations, I outline the matter a little and consider it sketchily in its first aspects. The heart and core of the matter I am accustomed to entrust to heaven. The rest leave to the gods. Horace. Good and bad luck are, in my opinion, two sovereign powers. It is unwise to think that human wisdom can fill the role of fortune, and vain is the undertaking of him who presumes to embrace both causes and consequences, and to lead by the hand the progress of his affair. Vain especially in the deliberations of war. There was never more military circumspection and prudence than is sometimes seen among us. Could it be that they are afraid of losing themselves on the way, and are reserving themselves for the denouement of the drama? I will say more, that even our wisdom and deliberation, for the most part, follow the lead of chance. My will and my reasoning are moved now in one way, now in another, and there are many of these movements that are directed without me. My reason has accidental impulsions that change from day to day. The phases of their minds are changed. Their breasts conceive other emotions than before, when a stormy wind drove the clouds on. Virgil. Just observe who are the most powerful in the cities, and who do their jobs best. You will ordinarily find that they are the least able. It has happened to women, children, and madmen to rule great states, just as well as the ablest princes. And the gross-witted, says Thucydides, succeed as rulers more commonly than the subtle. We attribute the effects of their good fortune to their wisdom. As each man his own fortune plies, so he excels, and we all call him wise. Plautus. Wherefore I do indeed say that in every way events are meager evidence of our worth and capacity. Now I was just on this point, that we need only see a man elevated in dignity. Even if we had known him 3 days before as an insignificant person, there glides imperceptibly into our minds a picture of greatness and ability, and we persuade ourselves that, growing in status and authority, he has grown in merit. We judge him not by his worth, but, as we do with counters, by the rights conferred upon him by his rank. Let chance turn again, let him fall back and be mixed up in the crowd again, and everyone will inquire with wonder about the cause that had raised him so high. Is this he? They say. Didn't he know anything more about it when he was there? Are princes content with so little? Truly, we were in good hands. This is a thing that I have often seen in my time. Yes, even the mask of greatness put on in our plays affects and deludes us somewhat. What I myself adore in kings is a crowd of their adorers. All deference and submission is due to them, except that of our understanding. My reason is not trained to bend and bow, it is my knees. Melanthius, being asked what he thought of Dionysius' tragedy, said, I did not see it. It is so obfuscated by words. So most of those who judge the speeches of the great ought to say. I did not understand his meaning. It was so obfuscated by gravity, greatness, and majesty. Antisthenes was trying to persuade the Athenians one day to order their asses to be used in tilling the fields as well as the horses, whereupon he was answered that that animal was not born for such a service. That is all one, he replied. It just depends on your giving the order. For the most ignorant and incapable men whom you employ in command in your wars do not fail to become immediately very worthy of their charge, because you employ them in it. To this is related the custom of so many peoples who canonize the king they have created from among themselves, and are not content to honor him if they do not adore him. Those of Mexico, after the ceremonies of his coronation are completed, no longer dare look him in the face, but as if they had deified him by his royalty, they have him swear not only to maintain their religion, their laws, their liberties, and to be valiant, just, and kind, but also to make the sun move with his customary light the clouds shed rain in due season, the rivers run their courses, and the earth bear all things necessary for his people. I differ from this common fashion, and am more distrustful of ability when I see it accompanied by greatness of fortune and public esteem. We must take note of how much an advantage it is for a man to speak at his own time, to choose his own point, to break off the discussion or change it with magisterial authority, to defend himself against the objections of others with a nod, a smile, or a silence, in the presence of a company that trembles with reverence and respect. A man of prodigious fortune, coming to add his opinion to some light discussion that was going on casually at his table, began precisely thus: "It can only be a liar or an ignoramus who will say otherwise than," and so on. Pursue that philosophical point, dagger in hand. Here is another observation from which I derive much use: that in arguments and discussions, not all the remarks that seem good to us should be accepted immediately. Most men are rich with borrowed capacity. It may happen to a given man to make a fine point, a good answer and maxim, and put it forward without recognizing its force. That we do not possess all we borrow may perhaps be verified in myself. We must not always yield to it. Whatever truth or beauty it may have, we must either deliberately oppose it or draw back under color of not understanding it, in order to feel out, on all sides, how it is lodged in its author. It may happen that we run on the point of his sword, and help his blow to carry beyond its reach. I have sometimes employed, in the necessity and pressure of combat, ripostes that penetrated beyond my intent and my hope. I gave them only for their number, their recede for their weight. Just as when I debate with a vigorous man, I take pleasure in anticipating his conclusions. I save him the trouble of explaining himself. I try to foretell his idea while it is still nascent and imperfect. The order and pertinence of his understanding warn and threaten me from afar. So with these others, I do just the opposite. We must understand nothing except what they express, and presuppose nothing. If they judge in general terms, this is good, that is not, and hit it right, see whether it is fortune that hits it for them. Let them circumscribe and limit their statement a little. Why it is so, how it is so. These universal judgments that I find so common signify nothing. They are like men who salute a whole people in a crowd and in a body. Those who have real acquaintance with them salute them and notice them by name and individuality. But that is a hazardous undertaking. Hence I have seen it happen more than once a day, that minds with a weak foundation, trying to play clever by pointing out the beauties of some book they are reading, fix their admiration with so bad a choice that instead of teaching us the excellence of the author, they teach us their own ignorance. It is safe to exclaim, "That is beautiful," after hearing an entire page of Virgil. In that way the shrewd ones save themselves. But to undertake to follow him step by step, and to try to note with a specific and selective judgment where a good author surpasses himself, where he rises high, weighing the words, the phrases, the ideas, one after the other, get away from there. We must see not only what each one says, but also what he thinks, and also why he thinks it. Cicero. Every day I hear stupid people say things that are not stupid. They say something good. Let us find out how far they understand it. Let us see where they got it. We help them to use that fine remark or that fine reason which they do not possess. They only have it in keeping. They have probably brought it forth by accident, and gropingly. We give it authority and value for them. You lend them a hand. What for? They are not grateful to you for it, and become all the more inept for it. Do not second them. Let them go. They will handle the matter like men who are afraid of getting scalded. They do not dare change its setting or its lighting, or go into it deeply. Shake it ever so little, and it escapes them. They abandon it to you, strong and fine as it may be. They are fine weapons. but they are badly shafted. How many times I have seen this by experience. Now if you happen to enlighten and confirm them, they promptly seize and steal from you the advantage of your interpretation. That is what I meant to say. That is just my idea. If I did not express it so, it was only for lack of words. Empty wind. We must use even malice to correct this arrogant stupidity. The doctrine of Hogiasis, that we must neither hate nor blame, but instruct, is right elsewhere, but here it is injustice and inhumanity to aid and set right a man who has no use for your help and is the worse for it. I like to get them mired and stuck even more than they are, and so deep that, if it is possible, they may recognize themselves at last. Stupidity and senselessness are not curable by a bit of admonition. We may properly say of this sort of repair work what Cyrus replied to the man who urged him to harangue his army on the point of a battle, that men do not become courageous and warlike on the spot by a good harangue, any more than someone suddenly becomes a good musician by listening to a good song. These are apprenticeships that have to be served beforehand by long and constant education. We owe this care to our families, this assiduity in correction and instruction, but to go and preach at the first passer-by and play schoolmasters to the ignorance and ineptitude of the first man we meet is a practice I greatly dislike. I rarely do so, even in discussions that I am in on, and rather give up the whole thing than come down to these misplaced and pedantic lessons. My nature is unsuited, either in speaking or in writing, for beginners, but as for things that are said in company or among others, however false or absurd I may judge them to be, I never cut across by either word or sign. Moreover, nothing vexes me so much in stupidity as the fact that it is better pleased with itself than any reason can reasonably be. It is unfortunate that wisdom forbids you to be satisfied with yourself and trust yourself, and always sends you away discontented and diffident, whereas opinionativeness and heedlessness fill their hosts with rejoicing and assurance. It is for the most incompetent to look at other men over their shoulders, always returning from the combat full of glory and cheer, and besides, this arrogance of language and gaiety of countenance usually give them the victory in the eyes of the audience, which is generally weak and incapable of judging and discerning clearly where the real advantages lie. Obstinacy and heat of opinion is the surest proof of stupidity. Is there anything so certain, resolute, disdainful, contemplative, grave, and serious as an ass? May we not include under the title of discussion and communication the sharp, abrupt repartee which good spirits and familiarity introduce among friends, bantering and joking wittily and keenly with one another, an exercise for which my natural gaiety makes me rather fit, and if it is not so high-pitched and serious as that other exercise I have just been speaking of, it is no less keen and ingenious, and no less profitable, as Lycurgus thought. For my part, I bring to it more freedom than wit, and have more luck at it than inventiveness. But I am perfect in forbearance, for I endure retaliation, not only sharp but even indiscreet, without being disturbed, and when a sally is made against me, if I have no brisk retort to make on the spot, I do not go wasting my time pursuing the point with a boring and lax argumentativeness, bordering on obstinacy. I let it pass, and, cheerfully lowering my ears, put off getting my revenge until a better time. There is no merchant who always gains. Most men change their countenance and their voice when strength fails them, and, by an ill-timed anger, instead of getting revenge, reveal their weakness and their impatience at the same time. In this gay mood, we sometimes pluck the secret strings of each other's imperfections, which, when we are calm, we cannot touch without offense, and we profitably give one another a hint of each other's defects. There are other games played by hand, thoughtless and violent, French style, which I mortally hate. I have a tender and sensitive skin. As a result of them, I have in my lifetime seen 2 princes of our royal blood brought to their graves. It is ugly to fight and play. For the rest, when I want to judge someone, I ask him how satisfied he is with himself, to what extent he is pleased with his words or his work. I want to get away from those fine excuses. I did it in play. This work unfinished from the anvil came. I was not an hour at it. I have not looked at it since. Well then, I say, let us put these pieces aside. Give me something that represents you fully, by which you would like to be measured. And then, what do you think is finest in your work? Is it this part or that? Is it the charm, or the matter, or the originality, or the judgment, or the knowledge? For I notice generally that people are as mistaken in judging their own work as that of others, not only because of the affection that is involved, but also because they have not the capacity to know and distinguish it for what it is. The work, by its own power and fortune, may second the workman beyond his inventiveness and knowledge and outstrip him. For my part, I do not judge the value of any other work less clearly than my own, and I place the essays, now low, now high, very inconsistently and uncertainly. There are many books that are useful by reason of their subjects, from which the authors derive no commendation, and there are good books, like good works, which shame the workman. I may write of the fashion of our banquets and our clothes, and write with bad grace. I may publish the edicts of my time and the letters of princes that pass into the hands of the public. I may make an abridgment of a good book, and every abridgment of a good book is a stupid abridgment, and that book may come to be lost, and things like that. Posterity will derive singular utility from such compositions. But what honor shall I get, unless for my good fortune? A good part of the famous books are of the sort. When some years ago I read Philippe de Comines, certainly a very good author, I noted this remark as uncommon, that we must be very careful not to serve our master so well that we keep him from finding a fair reward for our service. I should have praised the idea, not him. I came across it in Tacitus not long ago. Benefits are agreeable as long as they seem returnable, but if they go so much beyond that, they are repaid with hatred instead of gratitude. And Seneca says vigorously, "For he who thinks it is shameful not to repay does not want the man to live whom he ought to repay." To Cicero, in a weaker vein, he who thinks he cannot repay you can by no means be your friend. The subject, according to what it is, may give a man a reputation for learning and a good memory, but in order to judge the qualities that are most his own and most worthy, the strength and beauty of his mind, we must know what is his and what is not, and in what is not his, how much is due him in consideration of the choice, arrangement, embellishment, and style that he has supplied. What if he has borrowed the matter and made the form worse, as often happens? We who have little contact with books are in this strait, that when we see some fine piece of inventiveness in a new poet, some strong argument in a preacher, we dare not praise them for it until we have found out from some learned man whether this element is their own or someone else's. Until then, I always stand on my guard. I have just run through Tacitus's history at one reading, whence rarely happens to me. It has been 20 years since I put 1 whole hour at a time on a book, and I did it at the persuasion of a gentleman whom France esteems highly, both for his own worth and for a constant pattern of capacity and goodness that is seen in him and his several brothers. I know of no author who introduces into a register of public events so much consideration of private behavior and inclinations, and it seems to me, in contrast to how it seems to him, that having especially to trace the lives of emperors of his time, so strange and extreme in every way, and the many notable actions that their cruelty in particular produced in their subjects, he had a stronger and more attractive matter to treat and narrate than if he had had to tell of battles and universal commotions, so that I often find him sterile, skimming over these noble deaths as if he were afraid to bore us with their number and length. This form of history is by far the most useful. Public movements depend more upon the guidance of fortune, private ones on our own. This is rather a judgment of history than a reticule of it. There are more precepts than stories. It is not a book to read, it is a book to study and learn. It is so full of maxims that you find every sort, both right and wrong. It is a nursery of ethical and political reflections for the provision and adornment of those who hold a place in the management of the world. He always pleads with solid and vigorous arguments, in a pointed and subtle fashion, following the affected style of his time. They were so fond of an inflated manner that when they did not find any point and subtlety in the things, they borrowed it from the words. He rather takes after Seneca's writing. He seems to me more meaty, Seneca more pointed. His service is more suited to a disturbed and sick state, as ours is at present. You would often say that it is us he is describing and decrying. Those who doubt his good faith clearly accuse themselves of wishing him ill for some other reason. He has sound opinions and leans to the good side in Roman affairs. I have a small complaint, however, in that he judged Pompey more harshly than is consistent with the opinion of the good men who lived and dealt with him, and considered him quite on par with Marius and Sulla, except in so far as he was more covert. Pompey's intent in the government of affairs has not been acquitted of ambition or vengefulness, and even his friends feared that victory might have carried him away beyond the bounds of reason, but not to such an unbridled measure as it did those two. There is nothing in his life that threatened such deliberate cruelty and tyranny. Besides, we ought not to balance suspicion against evidence, so I do not believe Tacitus on this point. That his narratives are sincere and straightforward might perhaps be argued from the very fact that they do not always exactly warrant the conclusions of his judgment, which he follows according to the bias he has taken, often going beyond the matter he is presenting to us, which he has not deigned to slant one little bit. He needs no excuse for having approved of the religion of his time, in accordance with the laws that ordered him to, and for not having known the true religion. That was his misfortune, not his fault. I have chiefly considered his judgment, and I am not very clear about it in every instance. For example, these words in the letter which Tiberius, when old and sick, sent to the Senate: "What shall I write to you, gentlemen? Or how shall I write to you? Or what shall I not write to you at this time? May the gods and goddesses destroy me in worse manner than I feel myself perish every day, if I know." I do not perceive why he ascribes them so surely to a poignant remorse, tormenting the conscience of Tiberius. At least when I was reading that passage, I did not see it. This also seemed to me a little mean-spirited, that when he had to say that he had held a certain honorable office at Rome, he should apologize by adding that he did not say so out of ostentation. This touch seems shabby to me for a soul of his kind, for not to dare to speak roundly of oneself shows some lack of heart. A stout and lofty judgment, which judges sanely and surely, uses its own examples on all occasions, as well as those of others, and testifies frankly about itself as about a third party. We must pass over these common rules of civility in favor of truth and liberty. I dare not only to speak of myself, but to speak only of myself. I go astray when I write of anything else, and get away from my subject. I do not love myself so indiscriminately, nor am I so attached and wedded to myself that I cannot distinguish and consider myself apart, as I do a neighbor or a tree. It is as great a fault not to see how far our worth extends, as to say more about it than we see. We owe more love to God than to ourselves, and we know him less, and yet we speak our fill of him. If his writings tell us anything about his qualities, Tacitus was a great man, upright and courageous, not of a superstitious, but of a philosophical and high-minded virtue. We may find him bold in his testimony, as when he maintains of a soldier who was carrying a load of wood, that his hands became stiff with cold and stuck to his burden, so that they remained there attached and dead, having separated from his arms. When he says that Vespasian, by the favor of the god Serapis, cured a blind woman in Alexandria by anointing her eyes with his saliva, and I know not what other miracle, he conforms to the example and duty of all good historians. They keep a record of important events. Among public incidents are also popular rumors and opinions. It is their part to relate common beliefs, not to regulate them. That part concerns the theologians and philosophers, directors of consciences. Therefore his fellow historian, a great man like himself, said very wisely, "Indeed, I set down more things than I believe, for I can neither affirm things that I doubt, nor suppress what I have heard." Quintus Curtius, and this other, "These are things that it is not worth while either to affirm or to refute. We must aid by report." Livy. And writing in an age in which belief in prodigies was beginning to diminish, he says he does not want, for all that, to fail to insert in his annals and give a footing to things accepted by so many good people with such reverence for antiquity. That is very well said. Let them deliver history to us more as they receive it than as they see fit. I, who am king of the matter I treat, and who owe an accounting for it to no one, do not, for all that, believe myself in all I write. I often hazard sallies of my mind, which I mistrust, and certain verbal subtleties at which I shake my ears, but I let them run at a venture. I see that some gain honor by such things. It is not for me alone to judge them. I present myself standing and lying down, front and rear, on the right and the left, and in all my natural postures. Minds, even those alike in strength, are not always alike in application and taste. This is what my memory of Tacitus offers me in gross, and rather uncertainly. All judgments, in gross, are loose and imperfect.